There's a photograph sitting on my kitchen counter right now. I've been staring at it for 3 hours. My coffee went cold 2 hours ago, and I haven't moved to reheat it because moving would mean accepting that what I'm seeing is real. My name is Matt Van. I'm 42 years old, and until 6 days ago, I believed that being a good neighbor was enough. That kindness was a form of protection. That if you smiled at people, brought them food when they moved in, invited them to your barbecues, and remembered their kids' names, the universe would somehow shield you from the ugly things that happen to people who keep their curtains drawn and their doors locked. I was raised that way. My father used to say that a neighborhood is only as strong as the weakest handshake on the block. He built fences with strangers and lent his truck to people he barely knew, and died believing that human decency was a kind of armor. I think about that a lot now. About armor. About how confident you can feel behind something that's actually made of paper. We moved to Kitsap County, Washington 11 years ago. Samantha and I had just had Linnea, and Seattle had gotten too expensive too fast, too everything. We wanted trees. We wanted a yard where our daughter could run barefoot. We wanted neighbors who waved when you drove past instead of pretending you didn't exist. We found all of that on Thornwood Lane. 14 houses arranged in a gentle curve, backing up against 3 acres of Douglas firs that stayed green even in January. The Okafor family 2 doors down, the Lindquists across the street with their twin boys, old Mrs. Petrova at the end of the cul-de-sac who made Ukrainian honey cake for every birthday within a quarter mile. For a decade, we were happy. Not the aggressive Instagram kind of happy, just the quiet kind. The kind where you forget to be grateful because nothing has gone wrong in so long. Then, the Carvers moved in. I've been trying to figure out how to write this, how to explain what happened without sounding like I've lost my mind. I keep starting and stopping, deleting sentences because they look insane on the screen. But I need someone to know. I need someone to understand that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is assume that the people living next door are people at all. The photograph is still here. I haven't touched it since I found it. In about 10 minutes, I'm going to have to show it to Samantha. I'm going to have to explain to my wife why we need to pack our bags tonight, why we can't wait for the police to figure this out, why the family that live in that house isn't gone, not really, and why I think they've been waiting for us to stop being good to them. Because I know what happens next. The Carvers arrived on a Tuesday in late September. I remember because Linnea had just started 5th grade and was complaining about her new teacher, and I was only half listening while watching the move-in truck back into the driveway next door. There wasn't much to see. A standard rental truck, white with green lettering, a gray sedan pulling in behind it, 4 figures emerging, 2 adults, 2 children, moving with the tired efficiency of people who'd been driving for hours. "New neighbors," Samantha said, appearing beside me at the window. She had that look she gets when she's already planning something. "I'll make pancakes tomorrow." That was Samantha. Within 24 hours of anyone moving onto our street, she'd be at their door with food. Banana pancakes were her specialty. She developed the recipe when Linnea was a toddler and refused to eat anything else for 6 months straight. Now it was her calling card, her way of saying welcome to Thornwood Lane. We're the good ones. The next morning, I left for work before she headed over. I manage inventory for a marine supply company in Bremerton, which sounds more interesting than it is. Mostly, I stare at spreadsheets and try to figure out why we're always short on dock cleats. When I got home that evening, Samantha was sitting at the kitchen table with the pancakes still in their Tupperware container, untouched. "They didn't answer," she said. "Maybe they weren't home." "The car was in the driveway, Matt. Both cars, actually. They must have had a second one in the truck. I rang the doorbell 3 times. I knocked. I stood there for 5 minutes like an idiot." I sat down across from her. "They probably just needed space. Moving is exhausting. You remember what we were like after the Seattle drive." "I guess." She picked at the edge of the Tupperware lid. "It was weird, though. The curtains moved. The curtains? In the front window. When I was walking back to our house, I looked over my shoulder and the curtains moved, like someone had been watching me and then stepped back. I told her she was imagining things, that new neighbors often needed a few days to decompress before socializing, that some people were just private and it didn't mean anything was wrong. She nodded, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. Over the next few weeks, I started to understand why. The Carvers, we learned their name from the mailbox, not from them, kept to themselves in a way that felt less like introversion and more like avoidance. The husband was tall, thin, with sandy hair that never seemed to move even in the coastal wind. The wife was shorter, dark-haired, with a face that smiled when you waved but somehow didn't change expression. Their two boys looked about 8 and 10, always dressed in the same style of clothing, khaki pants, collared shirts, like they were perpetually ready for a school photo. I saw them bringing groceries in. I saw them checking the mail. I waved and they waved back, but they never crossed the property line, never lingered in the yard, never let their kids ride bikes on the street like every other child on Thornwood Lane. Maybe they're religious. Emeka Okafor suggested one evening when a few of us stood around his fire pit. Some of those stricter groups keep to themselves. Maybe they're in witness protection, joked Dale Lindquist, and everyone laughed. I laughed too, because it was easier to make jokes than to admit that something about the Carvers made me uncomfortable in a way I couldn't articulate. It wasn't anything they did, it was the way they existed, present but sealed off, like a house with all its windows painted shut. Samantha tried twice more with food, once with a casserole, once with cookies Linnea helped bake. Both times, no answer. Both times, the curtains moved. By the time Halloween arrived, we'd mostly stopped trying. They were just the quiet family next door, the ones who kept their lawn neat and their lights dim, and their lives completely opaque. We had no idea what we were living beside. Would have been waiting there, patient, long before we arrived. Halloween on Thornwood Lane was always a production. The Lindquist twins would spend weeks turning the garage into a haunted house. Mrs. Petrova handed out full-size candy bars like she was trying to single-handedly cause a dentist shortage. Emeka Okafor dressed as a different superhero every year, standing at the end of his driveway to high-five every kid who walked past. That year, Linnea wanted to be a vampire. Not a cute one. She was very specific about that. She wanted fake blood dripping from her mouth and pale makeup and plastic fangs that made her lisp when she talked. Samantha spent an hour on the costume while I carved pumpkins on the porch, watching the street fill up with ghosts and witches and one kid in the cardboard box who claimed to be a refrigerator. Around 6:30, I noticed the Carver house was dark. No porch light, no decorations, no bowl of candy on the steps. "Think they're not participating?" Samantha asked, stepping outside with Linnea in tow. "Looks like it." "The boys aren't out either." She scanned the crowd of children moving down the sidewalk. "I haven't seen them all evening." I shrugged. Some families don't do Halloween. Religious reasons maybe, or they just don't like it. "It's weird, Matt. Those kids are what, 8 and 10? What kind of parents don't let their kids trick-or-treat?" I didn't have an answer for that. Linnea tugged at Samantha's hand, eager to join her friends, and I watched them disappear into the stream of costumes flowing toward the cul-de-sac. The Carver house sat there in the dark, curtains drawn, not a single light visible from any window. I kept glancing at it throughout the night. Couldn't help myself. At one point, I thought I saw movement on their second floor, a shape passing behind the glass, but it was gone before I could focus on it. By 9 o'clock, the street had emptied out. Linnea came home with a pillowcase full of candy and a sugar high that took another 2 hours to burn off. We watched a movie, sorted her haul into good and trade piles, and eventually got her to bed around 11. I fell asleep thinking about nothing in particular. I woke up to Samantha shaking my shoulder. Matt, wake up. Something's wrong with Linnea." The clock read 6:47 a.m. Gray light leaked through the blinds. I followed Samantha down the hall to our daughter's room, my mind still fuzzy with sleep, not yet understanding the panic in my wife's voice. Linnea was sitting up in bed, looking confused. Her pajama sleeve was pushed up to her elbow, and on her forearm, I stopped breathing. Bruises. 4 of them, arranged in a curved line across her skin. And below them, slightly offset, a 5th mark. The pattern was unmistakable. A handprint, small, like it belonged to a child. "It doesn't hurt," Linnea said, poking at the marks. "I don't know where it came from." "Did someone grab you last night?" Samantha asked, her voice tight. "At any of the houses? Did anyone touch you?" "No, I don't think so. I was with Maya and Britta the whole time." The Lindquist twins. They'd been inseparable since kindergarten. I knelt beside the bed, examining the bruises more closely. They were deep, purple, almost black at the center, fading to yellow at the edges, like they'd been there for days, not hours. But Linnea's arms had been fine last night. I'd helped her wash off the vampire makeup before bed. "Stay here," I told Samantha. "I'm going to call Dale." I didn't know why that was my first instinct. Maybe because his girls had been with Linnea. Maybe because I needed someone else to tell me I wasn't losing my mind. Dale picked up on the 3rd ring, his voice groggy. "Matt? It's not even 7. What's—" "Check your daughter's arms." Silence. Then footsteps. A door opening, muffled conversation. When Dale came back on the line, he sounded like someone had poured ice water down his back. "Maya has them too. Both arms. Britta's got one on her ankle." Within an hour, we'd confirmed it. Every child on Thornwood Lane who'd gone trick-or-treating had woken up with bruises, handprints, all of them, all roughly the same size, small, like they belonged to children around 8 or 10 years old, the same age as the Carver boys, the boys who hadn't been outside, the boys who never played with anyone. No one said it out loud, not yet. We stood in the Okafor's living room, 7 anxious sets of parents comparing photos of our children's skin, trying to make sense of something that refused to make sense. But we were all thinking it, and we were all looking toward that dark house next door. We called the police that morning. Of course we did. 7 families, 14 parents, all convinced something terrible had happened to our children while they slept. The deputy who showed up was a young guy named Reeves, maybe 25, with the kind of mustache that suggested he was still figuring out how to grow facial hair. He took notes, he looked at the bruises, he asked if any of the children had been fighting or playing rough. He asked if they'd eaten anything unusual, as if candy could somehow cause handprint-shaped contusions. "We'll look into it," he said, which meant nothing. "What about the house next door?" I asked. "The new family. Their kids weren't out last night, and these bruises, they're the size of children's hands." Reeves glanced at the Carver house, then back at me. "Sir, you're suggesting that 2 kids broke into every home on this street and grabbed the other children without anyone waking up?" When he said it like that, it sounded insane. I knew it sounded insane, but I also knew what I'd seen on my daughter's arm. "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm telling you something happened, and those are the only kids who weren't accounted for." He wrote something down. Probably paranoid father, possible neighborhood dispute. Then he drove away, and that was the end of the official investigation. The bruises faded over the next week. Linnea's were gone within 5 days, leaving no trace except my memory of them. The other children healed at similar rates. No new marks appeared. Life, as it tends to do, began to smooth over the strangeness like water closing over a drop stone. But we didn't forget, and we didn't stop watching the Carver house. November crawled by, the days got shorter, the rain got heavier, and the Carvers remained as sealed off as ever. I saw the husband leaving for work in the mornings. He drove a gray Subaru, always backing out of the driveway at exactly 7:15. The wife appeared occasionally to collect packages from the porch. The boys were ghosts. I caught glimpses of them through windows, pale shapes moving behind glass, but never outside, never in the yard, never anywhere a normal child would be. Samantha stopped trying to make contact. So did everyone else. The Carvers had drawn a line, and we'd learned to respect it, or at least to stop crossing it. Then came the night of November 19th. I remember the date because it was a Wednesday, and Wednesdays were my late nights at work. I'd gotten home around 9, eaten leftover pasta standing over the sink, and crawled into bed beside Samantha by 10. Linnea had been asleep for hours. The house was quiet, the rain tapping steadily against the roof, and I drifted off almost immediately. The scream woke me at 2:14 a.m. I know the exact time because I looked at the clock the moment my eyes opened, some instinct telling me I'd need to remember. The scream was high, raw, and unmistakably female. It cut through the rain and the walls and the fog of sleep like a blade through wet paper. Samantha was already sitting up. What was that? I don't know. I was out of bed, moving toward the window. It sounded close. Matt, that came from next door. She was right. I knew she was right. The Carver house was maybe 40 feet from our bedroom window, separated by a narrow strip of lawn and a cedar fence I'd helped the previous owners install years ago. Another scream. Shorter this time, choked off in the middle like someone had clamped a hand over the source. Call 911, I said, already pulling on pants. I'm going over there. Matt, wait. But I was already down the stairs, shoving my feet in the boots, grabbing a flashlight from the kitchen drawer. I don't know what I thought I was going to do. I'm not a hero. I'm a guy who counts dock cleats for a living. But a woman was screaming next door and I couldn't just stand there. Outside, the rain had softened to a mist. I crossed my lawn and stopped at the property line, flashlight beam cutting through the dark toward the Carver house. Every window was black. The porch light was off. The whole structure looked dead, like a house that had been abandoned for years rather than one that supposedly held a family of 4. Matt. I turned. Dale Lindquist was jogging across the street in his bathrobe, followed by Emeka still pulling on a jacket. Behind them, I could see lights flickering on in other houses. The screams had woken half the neighborhood. You heard it too? Dale asked, slightly out of breath. Hard to miss. It sounded like someone was being murdered, Emeka said. His voice was steady, but I could see the tension in his jaw. We need to check on them. The 3 of us approached the Carver house together. I'm not ashamed to admit I was grateful for the company. The porch steps creaked under our weight. Old wood, probably original to the house, and I raised my hand to knock on the door. Before my knuckles could connect, the porch light snapped on. The door opened. Mrs. Carver stood in the doorway, wearing a pale blue robe, her dark hair slightly disheveled. She looked normal. Tired, maybe. Annoyed, definitely. But normal. Can I help you? Her voice was polite but clipped, the voice of someone interrupted in the middle of something. Ma'am, we heard screaming, Dale said. Loud screaming, coming from your house. Is everything okay in there? Emeka added. Is anyone hurt? Mrs. Carver's expression shifted into something that might have been embarrassment. She glanced over her shoulder, then back at us. I'm so sorry if we disturbed you. The boys were watching a horror movie, one of those streaming things. You know how kids are. They had the volume up too loud. I've already told them to turn it off. I stared at her. That was a movie? A woman screaming in a movie, yes. One of those slasher films. I apologize, truly. We're still getting used to the house, and I didn't realize how thin the walls were. Behind her, the house was dark and silent. No television glow. No sound of children. Just shadows and the faint smell of something I couldn't quite identify. Sweet and sour at the same time, like fruit left out too long. "We'd like to come in," I heard myself say, just to make sure everyone's all right. Mrs. Carver's smile didn't waver, but something behind her eyes went flat. "That won't be necessary. As I said, it was just a movie. But thank you for your concern." She began to close the door. "We'll keep the volume down. Good night." The door clicked shut. The three of us stood on the porch, rain misting against our backs, staring at the closed door like it might offer some explanation. "That wasn't a movie," Dale said quietly. I nodded. But what could we do? We'd knocked, we'd asked, she'd answered. We went home. We told ourselves it was probably fine. It wasn't. Not even close. December brought snow, which was unusual for Kitsap County. Not much, just a dusting that turned the Douglas firs into something out of a postcard, but enough to keep everyone indoors and distracted. The holidays came and went. Linnea got a telescope she'd been begging for since summer. Samantha and I exchanged the kind of practical gifts that couples our age exchange: new cookware, a weighted blanket, a promise to finally take that trip to Vancouver we've been postponing for 3 years. The Carver house stayed quiet. No more screams, no more incidents. The bruises had faded into something we didn't talk about, filed away in the same mental drawer where we kept other things we couldn't explain. That time the power went out for 6 hours and came back on its own. The dead crow we'd found on the porch arranged in a perfect circle of its own feathers. Weird things happen. You move on. Then, in late January, something shifted. I was taking out the recycling when I saw Mr. Carver standing at the end of his driveway, hands in his pockets, looking up at the sky. It was a clear morning, cold enough that my breath fogged in front of me. And for once, he wasn't rushing to his car or retreating into the house. "Morning," I called out, more out of habit than expectation. He turned, and for the first time since they'd moved in, he walked toward me. "Good morning." His voice was pleasant, unremarkable. "Matt, right? I don't think we properly introduced ourselves. I'm Gerald." I shook his hand. His grip was firm, his palm dry and cool. Up close, he looked ordinary. A man in his early 40s, sandy hair going gray at the temples, the kind of face you'd forget 5 minutes after seeing it. "We've been meaning to come by," Gerald continued. "The move was difficult. Took us longer to settle in than we expected. But Diane and I were hoping we could start fresh with the neighborhood." I didn't know what to say. After months of silence, of curtains moving and doors staying shut, here was this man talking to me like we were old friends catching up. "Sure," I managed. "That'd be great. Maybe the boys could play with your daughter sometime. They've been cooped up too long. It would be good for them to make friends." Something about the way he said it, the boys, not their names, stuck with me. But I nodded anyway, because what else do you do when your strange neighbor suddenly decides to be normal? Over the next few weeks, the Carvers emerged from their shell. Diane brought a casserole to the Lindquists. Gerald helped Emeka shovel his driveway after a late-season ice storm. The boys, I learned their names were Peter and Simon, started appearing in the cul-de-sac, riding bikes that looked brand new, waving at passing cars. Linnea was hesitant at first. "They're weird, Dad," she told me one evening. They don't talk like normal kids. What do you mean? She scrunched up her face, searching for words. They're too polite. Like they're reading from a script or something. And they never laugh. Not really, they just make this sound. I told her to give them a chance. I told her people were different and that didn't make them bad. I said all the things a parent is supposed to say, while ignoring the part of me that remembered the bruises, the screams, the smell of rotting fruit behind Diane Carver's shoulder. By March, the weirdness had faded enough that Dale suggested the neighborhood barbecue. Spring's coming, he said. Let's shake off the winter. Matt, your backyard's the biggest. You mind hosting? I didn't mind. Samantha was excited. She loved any excuse to plan a gathering. We picked a Saturday in mid-April and sent out invitations to the whole street. The Carvers, to everyone's surprise, declined. We'll be out of town that weekend, Diane told Samantha when she hand-delivered their invitation. Gerald's sister in Portland. We've had this trip planned for months. Samantha accepted it gracefully, but I could tell she was relieved. So was I, though I didn't admit it. The Carvers had been making an effort, yes, but having them at a gathering in our backyard, watching their boys eat hot dogs next to Linnea, making small talk with Diane over potato salad, felt like too much too soon. The day of the barbecue was perfect. Clear skies, temperature in the low 60s. We had maybe 30 people spread across our lawn. Neighbors, co-workers, some of Linnea's friends from school. Dale manned the grill while Emeka handled the music. Around 4 o'clock, I found myself sitting at one of the folding tables with Virgil Teague. Virgil was an old-timer, one of the few people on Thornwood Lane who'd been there since the houses were built. He'd grown up in the area, left for a few decades, then returned after his wife passed. We'd become friendly. He liked telling stories, and I liked listening. Hell of a turnout, Virgil said, nursing a beer. Reminds me of the old days. This street used to be tighter. Everyone knew everyone. It's still pretty good, I said. Compared to where we lived in Seattle, anyway. He nodded, then reached into the bag he brought with him and pulled out a worn leather photo album. I've been meaning to show you this. Found it when I was cleaning out the garage last month. Figured you'd get a kick out of it. The album was old, the leather cracked and faded. Virgil flipped it open, revealing page after page of photographs from decades past. Thornwood Lane in the 80s. The same houses, but with different cars in the driveways, different trees in the yards, different families posing on porches. That's the Morrison place, Virgil said, pointing to a photo. Before the Okafor family bought it. And here's the Lindquist house when it was the Bergstroms. I smiled, enjoying the glimpse into the street's history. Then Virgil turned another page and my smile died. That's the Carver house, he said. Back when the Holloways lived there. Nice family. Kept it themselves, though. They left pretty suddenly, as I recall. Never did find out why. I wasn't listening anymore. I was staring at the photograph. It showed the house next door to mine, 20 years younger but unmistakably the same structure. Standing on the front porch were 4 people. A man, a woman, and 2 boys. The man was tall and thin, with sandy hair. The woman was shorter, dark-haired. The boys looked about 8 and 10, dressed in khaki pants and collared shirts. They were the Carvers. Not people who looked like the Carvers, not relatives or ancestors or coincidental doppelgangers. The exact same people. The same faces, the same postures, the same clothes. The man's hand rested on the older boy's shoulder in exactly the same way Gerald Carver's hand had rested on Peter's shoulder when I'd seen them walking to their car last week. Virgil. My voice came out strange, thin. When was this taken? He squinted at the photo. Let's see, that would have been 04 or 05, right before they moved out. 20 years ago. The kids, I said. The boys in this picture, how old were they? 8 and 10 maybe, something like that. Nice kids, but quiet. Never really played with the other children on the block. I looked at the photograph. I looked at the Carver house, visible through the gaps in my fence, sitting empty while its occupants were supposedly in Portland. The same house, the same family, the same children who hadn't aged a day in 2 decades. My hands had started to shake. I set down my beer because I was afraid I'd drop it. The sounds of the barbecue, laughter, music, the sizzle of burgers on the grill seemed to come from very far away, like I was hearing them through water. Matt? Virgil was staring at me. You all right? You look like you've seen a ghost. I wanted to tell him. I wanted to point at the photograph and explain that the family in this 20-year-old picture was the same family living next door to me right now. But their children hadn't grown. But something was deeply wrong with the people we've been trying so hard to welcome. But how do you say that out loud? How do you explain the impossible while sitting in a backyard barbecue, surrounded by friends and the smell of grilled meat? I'm fine, I lied. Just recognize someone. Old memory. Virgil nodded. He kept flipping through the album, but I wasn't listening anymore. I was thinking about the boys who never laughed properly, about the smell behind Diane's shoulder, about a woman screaming in the middle of the night. I took the album from him. Can I borrow this? Just for a few days. He shrugged. Keep it as long as you like. I walked into my house and locked the door behind me. The Carvers didn't come back. I waited 3 days before I said anything. 3 days of watching their driveway stay empty, their porch light stay dark, their mailbox overflow with catalogs and bills nobody collected. 3 days of telling myself they'd extended their trip, that Portland was nice this time of year, that people change plans all the time. On the 4th day, I showed Samantha the photograph. She stared at it for a long time without speaking. I watched her face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and something that looked like the beginning of fear, before settling into a kind of numb acceptance. That's them, she finally said. That's exactly them. 20 years ago. The boys of the same age. I know. She set the photograph down on the kitchen table, then picked it up again, as if hoping it would change if she looked at it differently. Nat, this isn't possible. I know. People they can't just... She stopped, shook her head. What are we supposed to do with this? I didn't have an answer. I'd spent 3 days turning that question over in my mind, examining it from every angle, and I still didn't have an answer. Call the police? And tell them what? That our neighbors appeared in an old photograph? That their children hadn't aged? They think we were crazy. I was starting to think we might be crazy. On day 5, Dale knocked on our door. Have you seen the Carvers? He asked. His face was tight, worried. Their mail is piling up. I tried calling the number Diane gave us for emergencies, but it's disconnected. They said they'd be in Portland, Samantha said. For almost a week? Without telling anyone they'd be gone this long? Dale shook his head. Something's wrong. I can feel it. I showed him the photograph. Dale went pale. He sat down heavily on our porch steps, the photo trembling slightly in his hands. This has to be a mistake, he said. Some kind of relatives or... Same faces, Dale. Same clothes on the boys. Same exact pose. He looked up at me. What are you saying? I don't know what I'm saying, but I think we need to look inside that house. We gathered a group that evening. Me, Dale, Emeka, and Virgil, who insisted on coming despite being 73 and walking with a cane. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that felt obscenely beautiful, given what we were about to do. The Carver house looked the same as always. Neat lawn, clean siding, curtains drawn tight against the world. We stood on the sidewalk for a moment, none of us quite willing to take the first step. "We could be wrong," Emeka said quietly. "They could come home tomorrow with souvenirs and stories about the coast." "They could," I agreed. "But they won't." I walked up to the front door and knocked. The sound echoed back at me, hollow and flat. No response. I knocked again, harder. Nothing. "Try the handle," Dale said. The door was unlocked. It swung open with a soft creak, revealing a dark foyer and the stale smell of a house that had been sealed too long. Not the rotting fruit smell from before. This was different. Older. Like dust and something underneath the dust that I didn't want to think about. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded thin in the emptiness. "Gerald? Diane?" Silence. We stepped inside, Virgil bringing up the rear with his cane tapping against the hardwood floor. The living room was pristine, furniture arranged with catalog precision, no photographs on the walls, no signs of the life that supposedly happened here. The kitchen was the same. Clean counters, empty sink, a calendar on the wall still showing April. "It's like a model home," Dale murmured. "Like nobody actually lived here." We checked the bedrooms upstairs. 4 of them, each decorated in the same sparse and personal style. The boys' room had bunk beds and a bookshelf filled with titles that looked like they'd never been opened. The master bedroom had a neatly made bed with hospital corners and a closet full of clothes arranged by color. Everything was perfect. Everything was wrong. "Basement," Virgil said. He was standing at the top of the stairs, pointing down with his cane. "Old houses like this, they always have basements." I hadn't noticed the door before. It was tucked behind the kitchen, painted the same color as the wall, almost invisible if you weren't looking for it. A thin line of darkness showed beneath it, and when I pressed my hand against the wood, I felt cold air seeping through the cracks. "We should call the police," Emeka said. We shouldn't be doing this." "And tell them what?" I asked. "That we broke into our neighbor's house because of an old photograph?" I opened the door. Wooden stairs descended in the blackness. I pulled out my phone, activated the flashlight, and started down. Each step groaned under my weight, the sound amplified in the enclosed space. The cold grew more intense as I descended, and so did the smell. That dust and something else smell, thicker now, coating the inside of my throat. The basement was unfinished. Concrete floor, exposed pipes, bare bulbs hanging from the ceiling. My flashlight beam swept across cardboard boxes, old furniture, the accumulated debris of decades. And then it found the table. I stopped moving. I stopped breathing. Behind me, I heard Dale make a sound that wasn't quite a word. 4 figures sat around the wooden table in the center of the basement. They were arranged like a family at dinner. 2 adults on one side, 2 children on the other. Their clothes were faded, their skin pulled tight and brown like old leather, the hair thin and brittle. They had been dead for a very long time. I forced myself to walk closer. The flashlight shook in my hand, casting jumping shadows across their faces. Their mouths were open, all 4 of them, frozen in expressions that might have been screams. Their eyes were gone, just dark sockets staring at nothing. On the table in front of them sat place settings, plates, forks, knives, napkins folded in the triangles, a centerpiece of plastic flowers, colors faded to gray. And behind them, on the wall, hung a calendar. April 2005. The same month, the same year, 20 years ago, to the week. "Oh God," Bale said. "Oh my God." I looked at the bodies. I looked at the calendar. I thought about the photograph from my kitchen, the family on the porch, the children who never aged. The Carvers hadn't moved into this house. They had never left. We called 911 from the front lawn. None of us could stand to stay inside. The police arrived in 15 minutes, followed by more vehicles. Forensics, the coroner, people in uniforms asking questions I couldn't answer properly because my mind kept circling back to that table, those bodies, those open mouths. The detective in charge was a woman named Harwell. She was patient with us, professional, but I could see the confusion in her eyes as she reviewed the preliminary findings. "The bodies have been here approximately 20 years, she told us. "Cause of death is still undetermined. There's no obvious trauma, no signs of violence. It's like they just stopped." "What about the family that was living here?" I asked. "The Carvers?" Harwell frowned. "We're looking into it, but so far we've got nothing. No records of anyone by that name purchasing or renting this property. No utility accounts, no vehicle registrations. We checked traffic cameras, security footage. It's like they never existed." I thought about Gerald shaking my hand, his palm dry and cool. I thought about Diane in the doorway, that smell behind her. I thought about Peter and Simon making the sound of laughter without really laughing. "They existed," I said. "We all saw them. Our children played with their children." Harwell nodded, but her expression said what her words didn't. Seeing something doesn't make it real. Maybe she was right. Maybe we've been looking at something that wasn't there. A family, shaped like a family, but hollow underneath. I didn't say that out loud, but standing on that lawn, watching strangers carry evidence bags out of the house next door, I knew one thing. Whatever the Carvers were, they weren't gone. The investigation went nowhere. Detective Harwell called me twice over the following week with updates that weren't really updates. The bodies had been identified through dental records as the Holloway family, Marcus and Patricia, their sons Daniel and Kevin, who had been reported missing in April 2005 after failing to show up for a family reunion. The case had gone cold within months. No suspects, no leads, no explanation. Until now. The forensic report was inconclusive. No poison, no signs of strangulation or trauma, no indication of how 4 healthy people had ended up mummified in their own basement. The medical examiner used phrases like unprecedented and requiring further study, which meant we have no idea what happened. As for the Carvers, they remain ghosts. Every database came up empty, every lead dissolved. Harwell told me, apologetically, that without evidence of a crime committed by living suspects, there wasn't much more she could do. "We'll keep the file open," she said. "But realistically, Mr. Van, I don't know where else to look." I thanked her. I hung up. I stared at the wall for a long time. The neighborhood tried to move on. Yellow tape came down from the Carver house. The forensic vans drove away. People stopped gathering on sidewalks to whisper and speculate. Life resumed its normal rhythms. School drop-offs, garbage days, the distant sound of lawnmowers on Saturday mornings. But I couldn't let it go. I kept thinking about those bodies, about the way they'd been arranged, so carefully, like someone had posed them for a portrait. About the place settings on the table, the napkins folded just so, the plastic flowers that had probably been bright and colorful 20 years ago. Whoever, whatever, had done this hadn't just killed the Holloways. They'd staged them, preserved them, kept them like specimens in a jar. Why? The question gnawed at me. I lost sleep over it. I snapped at Samantha, withdrew from Linnea, spent hours in my home office staring at the photograph from Virgil's album, searching for details I might have missed. "You need to stop," Samantha told me one night. "This is eating you alive, Matt. The police are handling it. There's nothing more we can do." She was right. I knew she was right. But knowing something and accepting it are different things. On the 6th day after the discovery, I went back to the house. I didn't tell Samantha. I waited until she'd left to pick up Linnea from soccer practice, then walked across my lawn and ducked under the police tape that still marked the property line. The front door was locked now. The police had secured it. But I remembered the window in the back that Dale had noticed didn't latch properly. It slid open with a push. The house smelled different. Cleaner somehow, as if the forensic team had scrubbed away whatever residue the Carvers had left behind. I moved through the empty rooms, not sure what I was looking for, just feeling like I needed to be here, like the house had something left to tell me. I ended up in the living room, standing where the furniture used to be. The police had taken most of it as evidence. What remained were indentations in the carpet, ghost shapes of a couch and chairs that no one had ever really sat in. Virgil's album was still at my house. I'd been keeping it on my desk, flipping through it, trying to understand what had happened. But as I stood in that empty room, I remembered something. I hadn't looked at every page. I'd stopped after seeing the Holloway photograph, too shaken to continue. I needed to see the rest. I climbed back out the window and crossed to my house, moving quickly now, driven by an urgency I couldn't explain. The album was where I'd left it. Leather cover cracked, pages yellowed with age. I sat down at my desk and opened it to where I'd stopped. The Holloway photograph was still there. Same porch, same family, same frozen smiles. I turned the page. My hand stopped. There was a new photograph. It hadn't been there before, I was certain of it. I had flipped past this page a dozen times in the last week, and it had always been blank. Just empty black paper with corner tabs meant to hold a picture that was never inserted. Now there was a picture. It showed my backyard, the barbecue, the folding tables, the same setup we'd used 3 weeks ago when Virgil had first shown me the album. Except the photo wasn't from 3 weeks ago. The light was different, softer, more golden, like late summer instead of spring. And there were people in the frame I didn't recognize. Neighbors' kids who'd grown taller, details that hadn't existed yet. This was a photograph of a barbecue that hadn't happened, and standing at the edge of the frame, partially obscured by the fence, were 4 figures. Gerald, Diane, Peter, Simon. They were behind my family. Samantha was laughing at something, her head thrown back. Linnea was reaching for a hot dog. I was standing at the grill, oblivious, smiling at someone off camera. None of us had noticed the Carvers, but they were there, right behind us, close enough to touch. And they were wrong. Their faces had started to slip. The skin sagged in places it shouldn't, revealed patches of something dark and wet underneath. Gerald's smile showed too much gum, the flesh pulling back from his teeth. Diane's eyes were sunken, ringed with bruises that looked like rot. The boys stood perfectly still, their hands at their sides, their expressions blank and hungry. They looked like the bodies in the basement had looked. They looked like something wearing the bodies in the basement. I closed the album. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely manage it. The photograph was a promise, a preview, a warning of what was coming, and I had no idea how to stop it. I sat there with the album closed for what felt like hours. The light outside my office window shifted from afternoon gold to evening gray, and I didn't move. I just sat there, trying to convince myself that what I'd seen wasn't real. But I'd held the photograph. I'd traced the edges with my fingertips. I'd looked into the rotting faces of the things that used to be the Carvers and seen something looking back. When Samantha's car pulled into the driveway, I heard it like a sound from another world. The engine cutting off, doors opening and closing. Linnea's voice, bright and ordinary, complaining about something that had happened at practice. The front door, footsteps, the everyday music of the family coming home. I wanted to stay in my office. I wanted to pretend I hadn't found anything, that the photograph didn't exist, that we could go on living our normal lives on our normal street in our normal house next to an empty building where 4 people had died screaming 20 years ago. But I couldn't, because the photograph wasn't just a picture. It was a blueprint, a menu, and my family was on it. I found Samantha in the kitchen, starting dinner. Linnea had already disappeared upstairs to shower, leaving a trail of grass-stained shin guards in her wake. For a moment, I just watched my wife. The way she moved, the way she hummed under her breath, the way she existed in our life like she belonged there, like this was permanent. Sam. She turned, and whatever she saw on my face made the smile fade from hers. What happened? I showed her the photograph. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just went very still, her eyes fixed on the image, her breathing shallow and controlled. When she finally looked up at me, her expression was the one she'd worn when her mother called to say her father had collapsed at work. That specific blend of fear and focus that meant the world had just shifted beneath her feet. "This is us," she said. "Yes." "This is our backyard." "Yes." "Matt, this hasn't happened yet. Linnea's wearing that shirt she picked out last week, the one with the band logo. She hasn't even worn it outside the house." I nodded. I'd noticed that too, along with a dozen other details that mark this photograph as something from the future, not the past. The new cushions we'd ordered for the patio chairs, the tomato plants I'd been meaning to stake, the scar on my left forearm that I gotten last month changing a tire. "How is this possible?" Samantha asked. Her voice was steady, but I could see her hands gripping the edge of the counter. "I don't know." "What do they want from us, Matt?" "I don't know that either. But I think..." I stopped, trying to find words for something that didn't fit into language. The Holloways. They were a family. 2 parents, 2 kids, living in that house. And then the Carvers showed up looking exactly like them. Same ages, same arrangement, like they copied them. Samantha's face went a shade paler. "You think they want to become us?" "I think they already have a template. I think they've done this before, maybe more than once. Find a family, study them, learn how to look like them, act like them, and then..." I didn't finish the sentence. I didn't have to. Samantha looked at the photograph again, at the things wearing the Carvers' bodies, standing behind us with their hollow eyes and peeling skin, at our daughter reaching for a hot dog, oblivious to the shapes crowding in behind her. "We have to leave," she said. "Tonight. We pack what we can and we go." "Go where?" "Anywhere. My sister's place in Arizona, a hotel, I don't care. We can't stay here, Matt. Not after this." She was right. Every rational part of my brain agreed with her. Whatever was happening, whatever the Carvers were, they had marked us. Staying meant waiting for the photograph to become reality. Staying meant sitting in our house while something ancient and patient learned how to wear our faces. But another part of me, the part that had grown up in small towns, that had been taught to stand your ground, that couldn't accept running from something I didn't understand, that part resisted. What if they follow us? I asked. What if leaving doesn't matter? Then we'll deal with that when it happens. But I'm not going to wait here for them to come back. I'm not going to let Linnea become. Her voice cracked. She pressed a hand to her mouth, steadying herself. I'm not going to let that happen to our daughter. I looked at the photograph one more time, at the smiling, innocent faces of my family, at the rot creeping in from the edges, the hungry shapes waiting just behind us. Pack a bag, I said quietly. I'll get Linnea. Samantha nodded and moved quickly toward the bedroom. I started for the stairs, then stopped. The album was still open on the counter, and there was a new photograph on the next page. It showed our car, packed with suitcases, pulling out of the driveway, and standing in the rearview mirror, getting smaller but never quite disappearing, were 4 figures watching us go. They were smiling. So here I am, back at the kitchen counter, staring at that photograph, coffee gone cold beside me. 3 hours now, maybe more. Time moves strangely when you're looking at a picture of your own ending. Samantha is upstairs with Linnea, packing bags we both know won't save us. I can hear them moving around, the soft thump of drawers opening and closing, the murmur of my wife's voice telling our daughter that everything is fine, that we're just taking a little trip, that there's nothing to worry about. She's lying. We both are. But what else do you tell an 11-year-old? That the neighbors weren't neighbors at all, but something older and hungrier wearing borrowed skin. That they've been watching us for months, learning how we move and speak and laugh, preparing to hollow us out and climb inside. I keep thinking about what my father used to say. A neighborhood is only as strong as the weakest handshake on the block. He believed in community and kindness and the idea that being good to people would keep you safe. We were good to the Carvers. We brought them pancakes and casseroles and cookies. We invited them to our gatherings. We let our daughter play with their boys. We did everything right, and none of it mattered. The title of this post, I've been staring at it for almost as long as the photograph. The emergency alert that went out in my head the moment I understood what we were dealing with. We were good to them for so long. It made us forget what happens when we aren't. But that's not quite right, is it? We never stopped being good to them. We smiled and waved and made small talk until the very end. The problem wasn't that we stopped being kind. The problem was that kindness was never the point. The Carvers didn't care whether we welcomed them or shunned them. They weren't interested in friendship or community or belonging. They were studying, cataloging, taking notes on how to become us once we were gone. Our warmth just made their work easier. I'm posting this because I don't know what else to do. Maybe someone has seen something like this before. Maybe there's a way to fight back, to break the pattern, to stop the photograph from becoming real. Or maybe I'm just screaming into the void, leaving a record so that when they find our bodies in our own basement, someone will know what happened. Someone will remember that we existed before they wore our faces. The album is still on the counter. I'm afraid to look at it again. Afraid there will be more photographs. Our arrival at some motel, our desperate phone calls, every step of our failed escape documented in faded Polaroids that shouldn't exist. But I'm more afraid of not looking, of not knowing how close they are. Samantha just called down to me. She says they're ready. Linnea is buckled in, clutching her telescope like it might protect her. I should go. I should stop writing and walk out that door and drive as far as I can. But I keep staring at that awful photograph, at my family, smiling and happy and completely unaware, at the 4 shapes behind them, rotting and patient and so terribly close. I keep thinking, maybe it's already too late. Maybe it was too late the moment they moved in next door. Maybe it was too late the moment Samantha rang that doorbell with her banana pancakes, and behind the glass, something ancient began to smile.